Hi, welcome back. This is volume 4. I'm Carmine from New York. I'm going to try and teach photography. In case this is your first time watching, I'm a photographer in New York since the 70s. My email, if you want to contact me, is blackandwhitephoto@aol.com. My photographs, there's hundreds or thousands of them on my website, carminetaverna.com. It has the photos, including the gear, the location, the date. Check it out. My website, I don't sell anything. There's no ads. It's just a place to view photographs. All right. Before we begin today's volume, I just want to acknowledge a fellow photographer has passed away. She was not only a fashion photographer, she was a cinema photographer, she was a camera person. She passed away this week. She was only 42 years old. She was killed while working as a camera person on a movie. Now, this woman, Helena Hutchins, had a wonderful background. She was raised in the Arctic on a military base. She went to school in the Ukraine. She came to the United States, where she enjoyed fashion photography, which led to cinema photography, and she was well known in the industry as a lovely person, as a motion picture filmmaker, as a fashion photographer. Helena Hutchins. It's funny. She's Ukrainian, and in one of the volumes that I made, volume 1, volume 2, I'm not sure, we talked about some of the best cameras come from the Ukraine, the Kiev cameras. It's crazy. Did I touch on everything? Yeah. All right. So our thoughts, all in the photography community, our thoughts go out to a fellow photographer, cinematographer, Helena Hutchins. She died while performing her craft, her profession. All right. So let's get going. Volume 4. Volume 3, we left off with film and lenses. Today, we are going to talk about the highlights in exposure. Okay? Today, we usually for demonstrations. This, let's see if we can get a nice close-up there. Okay, this is an Olympus OM1. All right, we're going OG. We're going old school on this camera. All right. This is a great little 35 millimeter, fully mechanical. All right. Now, what does fully mechanical mean? It means it needs no batteries to operate. Okay. Like the Spotmatic. Okay. It does have a place on the bottom for a flat cell battery, which only operates the light meter, which, as I mentioned, don't trust built-in light meters on very old cameras. Okay? That's why I want you guys to look for such cameras that are fully mechanical, don't require a battery to operate. Okay? This camera will work in the cold, in the heat. You could take thousands of photographs with it and don't have to worry ever about the battery running out, getting new batteries. Fully mechanical, just like the Spotmatic SP I showed you from Pentax. Okay? Now, let's talk about exposure. F-stops. F-stops, another name for aperture. Okay? That's in the lens. Okay? And that's what controls the light coming through the lens. It controls the opening, the diaphragm. Okay? A little bit of light, that would be a higher f-stop, a higher number. 32, 16, 11. And as the numbers go down, 5, 6, 2.8, the opening gets larger. Okay? Now, all lenses, a 2.8 lens, whether it's a 28 millimeter or a 500 millimeter, or it's made by Canon or it's made by Nikon, will let in the same amount of light at the same f-stop. Say a 5.6 f5.6 aperture on this lens. This is a nice lens. This is a Zuko, okay, made for Olympus cameras. Okay, this is really nice, very sharp, multi-coated. Okay, remember we talked about coatings, right? That you never want to get the actual lens dirty, because then you have to wipe it off. And what happens when you wipe it off? You're wiping off the coating. Okay, this is the UV filter that we mentioned. Where's the light? I want you to see the reflection. Oy. All right, you see a little bit there. All right, this is the front element. You see how all the coatings are still intact? Because the minute I buy a lens, I put a Hoya brand, Hoya, UV filter on the lens. If my thumb, finger, nose touches it, I can wipe this filter off. Yeah, the filter's multi-coated too, right? And if I wipe the coating off the filter, I throw it away. It's $12. I get another one. Okay? Now, there are cheaper filters, right? Don't get them. Vivitar, Tiffin. Don't get them. Get a Hoya. They've been around forever. They have the highest standards. Okay? Now, there's more expensive. There's B&W, right? Made in Germany. Excellent filter, but you don't have to spend 60, 80 for a filter. Okay? Now, why UV? Why an ultraviolet filter? Because it does not reduce the amount of light that's going into the camera. All right? There's no exposure difference. All right. This lens happens to have a built-in lens hood. Why are lens hoods important? Lens hoods are important because if you're shooting, okay, you're shooting this way, and the sun or your light source, let's say, is coming from an angle like this. Without a lens hood, the rays of the sun may hit the lens and make a light flare. It's a big circle of light, right, with lines. Sometimes it's very artistic. Most of the times it's just annoying. Put your lens hood on if you're shooting outside in the daylight. Very simple. Now, if your lens does not have a built-in lens hood, buy a lens hood. These cheap ones are rubber, okay? They just go on. If you have a filter, the filter also has threads for a hood. All right, come on. This happens to be a 52 millimeter rubber collapsible lens hood. Come on. Okay. All right. Now, That's if your lens didn't have a lens hood. This lens happens to have a lens hood. Now, a lens hood not only protects your lens, your film, your camera from lens flares in the final print, but it also protects against bumping into things. Like I mentioned in the other volume, doorknobs, right? They're the number one killer of front glass elements. It protects it. Metal lens hoods are better. They're more expensive. All right. These rubber ones, they're okay. All right. Sometimes they collapse. They push in without you even trying. All right. The metal ones are more expensive. All right. What do I prefer? I prefer a metal one. But the best lens hood are the free ones because they come built in. Okay. Now, what is the difference between a wide f-stop? So let's say in this case, this lens, the widest, is 3.5. This happens to be a 135 millimeter. Huh? Remember, we talked about that? How 135 millimeter lens is a beautiful portrait lens. It's also a beautiful telephoto lens. Small telephoto, not like a 400 millimeter telephoto. Now the difference between 3.5, which is the widest opening inside the lens, and the smallest, in this case it's an f22, little tiny dot, lets in a little tiny dot. Not only does it control the amount of light coming in to expose your film, but it controls the depth of field. Some people call it more accurately the depth of focus. It is used both artistically and to just get a good exposure. All right. When you are photographing a person outside and there's trees in the background, it's better to shoot at a wider opening. Hear me out. Like in this case, let's just say f3.5 or even 5.6 with 135 millimeter lens. You want to focus on an eye, okay? If they're positioned on an angle, it's the closest eye, okay? The eye that's closest to the camera. Now, you focus on the eye at f3.5, wide open. The background trees or the background buildings, whatever in the background, will be blurred. The face will be sharp. The background will be blurred, making it a beautiful, pleasing portrait. Now, you've got to be careful because if you're focusing on the eye, wide open, remember, the other eye may not be in focus. It's not going to be in focus. The nose won't be in focus. The lips. All right. So you can go f5.6. Okay. You can go to f5.6 right at the top. Okay. Come on. You gonna focus today? Be a buddy. Come on. Come on. All right, 5.6 might be better. This way you'll get a little bit more in focus, right? From the eye, right? Where are we? From the eye, maybe to the nose. All right. So that's called depth of field. Now, you're outside and you want to do landscape work. Okay. Close it down. Use a higher number, f-stop, 16. Why? Everything will be in focus. That's what you want. You're taking a landscape photograph of a lake. Now we're coming into the fall with the beautiful colored trees around the lake. Shoot at f16. Everything will be in focus. All right. Now, there's another thing about f-stops that you have to know. Every lens has a sweet spot. All right. What does a sweet spot mean? It means at what f-stop is the lens the sharpest? Wide open, almost no lens is at its sharpest. Most lenses closed all the way down. In this case, f/22 is not generally its sharpest. In photography, right now my experience goes back to the 70s, f/8. f/8 is the sharpest aperture for 99% of all lenses. Oy. Come on, wake up, you little pain in the neck. There we go, f/8. All right, you know what f/8 is. That's the sweet spot. Now, many times I'll go out shooting on aperture priority, meaning I'll pick the aperture and the camera will pick the shutter speed. And I want it on f/8 all day because it's at the sharpest sweet spot. Okay? f/8 generally is the sharpest f-stop, the sharpest aperture for most lenses. Not just the Olympus lenses, but Nikon and Canon and Leica, okay? Zeiss, all of them. So that's very important to remember. Now, shutter speed on this camera is one of the only cameras where the shutter speed is on the lens mount. Okay, this is not the shutter speed. This is just the film speed dial. On this camera, the shutter speed is on the lens mount. That stays permanent, and you take the lens off, but the shutter speed dial stays. All right, it's just a quirky thing about the Olympus OM1. All right, it's really highly rated, super well made 35mm camera. Shutter speeds. Now, what film photography and photography in general is, you need to have adjustable shutter speeds. If you want to use, like I said, f/8 all day long because it's the sharpest aperture, all right, and you have 400 speed film, you're going to use your Sekonic handheld light meter that we talked about. Okay, you take your meter reading, you set it on f/8, and it'll tell you what shutter speed to use. Generally, right, f/8 outside, sunny, it's going to be somewhere around, with 400 speed film, it's going to be somewhere around 250th of a second, 500th of a second. All right, but you can't guess. Sunny 16 works in a pinch. Your handheld Sekonic light meter will work all the time. All right. Now, shutter speed, you want to stop action. Let's say you're at a baseball game and you want to photograph the player running from one base to another base. If you want to freeze that action, you had better use a fast shutter speed. Now, what's a fast shutter speed? High number. All right. In this case, for this camera, the highest shutter speed is 1/1000th of a second. Okay. Now, 1/1000th of a second is also part of the exposure triangle. Right? Exposure triangle, shutter speed, f-stop, film speed. Those three things work together. Okay? Now, if you're going to use a very fast shutter speed, the shutter is open very little. It opens and closes very quickly, 1/1000th of a second. So you may not be able to use the sweet spot, f/8. You might have to open it all the way up. In this case, f3.5. But your handheld Sekonic light meter will tell you 1/1000th of a second. You set the dial on the handheld light meter to 1,000th of a second, and it'll show you the corresponding correct f-stop to use. Now, let's say it says for 1,000th of a second you're outside. For 400 speed film, it calls for an f2.8. This lens doesn't open up to f2.8. It only opens up to 3.5. So you have to change your handheld light meter to a lower, slower shutter speed. F5, 1/500th of a second or 1/250th of a second, all right, in order to use f8 or 5.6 or even 3.5. You can't shoot at an f-stop that the lens doesn't have. All right? So you can't say, I can't take the picture of the person running around the bases because my shutter speed's going to be too slow. Not really. Not really. If the lighting conditions outside and your film speed, right, and you're limited by the widest f-stop, you can still take a photograph of a person running around the bases. How? You have to follow them like this. You got to focus. You have your light meter setting, right? Whatever the fastest shutter speed you can use and corresponding widest f-stop, right? Let's just say, with the lighting conditions, the fastest shutter speed you can use using your Sekonic handheld light meter is 2/50th of a second at 3.5. You're focused on the person and they start to run. You have to do this. You have to follow them. Okay? Now what'll that do? That'll make them perfectly in focus and the background will be blurred because they're moving at the same speed as the camera. Okay? They're moving at the same speed of the camera. They're running. Boom, you got it. You've seen these photographs. The person, the runner, is perfect. You can make out everything, all the details. You can even, depending on the lens, you see the stitching on their uniform. But the background will show that beautiful background blur. And you know by the photograph instantly, this is an action photograph because the person's running and you can tell that the camera was moving with them, right? Person's running, you got it. Okay? It works for everything that's moving. Don't be intimidated that, my lens is too slow. I only have a 3.5 lens. I want to go buy a 1.4 lens. You don't need it. What you need is the skill to know that you can change your shutter speed, go wide open, but then use the technique of following your subject. Boom, you got it. Boom, you got it. Okay? So, shutter speed can also be used for very artistic uses. Now, you can, on this particular camera, the slowest shutter speed, all right, is 1 second. Okay? But they also, most cameras have a B setting. B stands for bulb. In the old days, you had to, old days, like in the 20s, the photographer would have to open the lens, open the shutter, it's exposing the film, and he had a flash bulb. Remember flash powder? He had to ignite it. You'd have this explosion of light, and then after that died down, he'd stop the exposure. That's where the B comes from. Now, B is very cool. I use it quite often at night. I go to a local highway overpass or a bridge, right? Photographing a bridge at night with the cars going over it. You'll use your light meter. They work in the dark too. You take your light meter reading, all right? Now, say I'm on the road and I want to photograph the bridge with the cars going over it, and I want to get those streaks of red brake lights and the white of the headlights and the lights on trucks and buses that are way up high, right? They call them running lights, I think. You get them up here, or even if you're lucky enough to get like a tow truck and it has a revolving light, you'd get a light, and then you'll get a light, and then you'll get a light. It's beautiful. So you use your Sekana can light meter, right? And it'll tell you, all right, now remember, you want to use your smallest opening. In this case, f/22. Why? Because you want to cut down the amount of light, so you do get a longer shutter speed, and you get a lot of depth of field. All right, so f/22, your triangle, your exposure triangle, your f-stop, f/22, your film speed, 400, now your shutter speed. Your light meter will probably say 5 seconds, 5-second exposure. All right, now, growing up, you learned that how to count 1 second. 1 second is not 1, 2, no. A lot of photographers, what we use, if you don't have a stopwatch or if you don't have an electronic timer, right, you use 1/1000. To say that word, 2 words, 1/1000, was that 3 words? 1/1000, right? So your light meter said, what did I say, 5 seconds? B, shutter speed. F-stop, 22. You're on a tripod. Your focusing is at infinity, okay? And you go 1/1000, 2/1000, 3/1000, 4/1000, 5/1000, and you're done. Now, your finger touching this will move the camera, even if it's on a tripod. So in this case, you would remove, this is a little accessory, it's a thumb shutter pad. All right, you take that off, and in that hole, in the hole here, right, most 35mm film cameras will have those threads, that hole, for a cable release. You screw it in, it has a cable and a thumb plunger. It's called a shutter cable release. You screw it in, your camera's on a tripod, and you hold it down. You want me to get one? Oy, hold on. So, this is the cable release. This end goes in the camera. This end is what your thumb holds down. All right. So you take the camera. I'm going to put this in here. Screws in, you turn it, turn it, turn it, turn it. By the way, these are very cheap. A couple of bucks. Buy them used on eBay. Okay, so you want to take photograph of light streaks from cars and trucks at night. Lens closed all the way down. In this case, f/22. Focusing, infinity. Shutter is set to B for bulb. It'll stay open as long as you're holding down the shutter. Okay? Our Sekana light meter said that for f/22 at 400 speed film, you got to use an exposure of 5 seconds. Okay? You're all framed. You frame the picture. You look through the lens. You focused. It's going to be an infinity. And you're ready to take your picture. And 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000. And you let go. Okay? Have fun with it. Take a bunch of pictures. Move the camera. Move your location. Okay? So that's what B is, and how to have fun with B. Also, one thing that I used to do when I was first starting out is I was out at night a lot taking night photographs. Love taking night photographs. Here's something fun. You could set your camera on a tripod. Do the same thing I just said. Same setup. B is your shutter speed. F22 is your aperture. Okay? And hold on, I want to get a different cable release. Okay. This cable release is a little bit different. All right, I want you to see this. See the end? See what it has? It has that little tiny screw right there. See? I'm turning it like that. See that screw? Right here. This screw. Right here. So you just take this cable release. I'm getting to a point, trust me. All right. This screws in to your shutter button. Okay. Make sure that this is loose. All right. So now you're on tripod. You have your cable release. Right. But here's the difference. I can't hold this up while I do it. Here's the difference. You have to listen. All right. Press B. You press the shutter button. And then you tighten the screw. Okay. Now that shutter is wide. That shutter now is wide open. You don't have to touch it. What I used to do to have fun, all right, it looks something like this. Okay. There's the little screw on top. There you go. There's the screw. And that's holding the shutter down. This plunger down. And the curtain is open. The aperture, the shutter is open. It's exposing the film. It's at night. Film's on your camera's on the tripod. Used to go in front of the camera, right? And with a flash, right? And with a flash, right, off the camera, you would turn it on, and every flash has a test button on the back. All right? And you can stand in view of the lens. Yeah, in your mind, you know that between this tree and that bench is what's going to be in the frame. And you could take a flash picture, whether you hold the flash underneath your chin, over your head, right, out of frame, down low, right, down low. You fire the flash, boom. Then you move to another location, and you take another picture with the flash in a different angle. Don't have the flash facing the lens. Boom. Take another flash of you, or a friend, or two friends. And you could do this throughout the whole frame. So when you get your picture developed, or you develop it yourself, hopefully, and you print it, you'd be like, oh, this is so cool. It's a night shot, and you're in the picture 15 places using a handheld portable flash unit that you just pressed the test button. Okay? It's one good reason. And then you come back to the camera and You loosen the little screw, listen, and now the shutter's closed. Okay, so if you're going to get a cable release, right? If you're going to get a cable release, get one that has this little, where are you? That has this little tightening screw. Okay? This one, the other one I showed you, right? Doesn't have it. Right? These, without it, are cheaper than the ones that have a little screw by about a quarter. All right? You don't need one very long. These are only about 8 inches. Okay? Cable shutter release. All right, let's keep going. On some cameras, you'll see T in your shutter choices, the letter T for time, and that works differently than B, right? With B, its shutter will stay open until you let go. With T, this camera doesn't have T. You press it, you walk away, you come back. Sometimes you press it again, or sometimes you have to change the shutter speed, or sometimes you have to turn the camera off, and then the shutter closes. T replaced the little locking cable release nut. It replaced it. Okay? So that's T. T is different than B. B, you hold it down. Shutter opens, let go, shutter closes. T, press it down, shutter stays open forever until you come back. Either press it again, change the shutter speed, or turn the camera off, depending on the camera. All right, now exposure. Let's say your Sekonic light meter says this picture will be exposed perfectly at 5.6 aperture with a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second. And you're saying, you know what? I remember what Carmine said, that f8's the sweet spot. Well, if you close the lens from 5.6 to 8, right? You're closing it, getting a little smaller, and you slow down the shutter speed from 1/125th to a 60th, it's exactly the same exposure. If you close down your aperture, make it smaller, let less light in, and you slow down the shutter speed, it's exactly the same amount of light exposing the film. Now, say your exposure Sekonic handheld light meter says, you know what? You should take this picture at f5.6. That's the hole, that's the aperture in the lens, letting a limited amount of light in. And shutter speed should be 1/125th of a second with that 400 speed film for perfect exposure. But you remember what Carmine from New York said, you know what, I want to blur the background a little bit. I want to open the aperture. I want to blur out the background a little bit. I want to go to f4. Okay, you're letting more light in. Well, you're letting more light in. The shutter speed was recommended on the Sekonic light meter at 1/125th of a second. Well, if you go from 1/125th to 1/250, now you got perfect exposure. You opened up the lens aperture, right? But your shutter speed down here is too slow. If you move it up, now you have the exact same exposure. Okay? Knowing what the f-stop does, besides just limiting the amount of light in, but controlling the background or the foreground, what's going to be in focus. It's there for a reason. I remember when I started photography, right? It was daunting. All right? Everybody understands the focusing because it says it clearly. This will be in focus. This is how many feet. Plus, it's a single lens reflex. You look through here, the prism and the mirror goes here. It goes right through the lens, just looking right through it. So you're focusing. Focus is focus. All right? But then shutter speed, these dials, holy cow, what's going on here? But you realize they're there for a purpose. They're there for you to control your art, the art of photography. Okay? Now, let's talk about a little bit more about depth of field. In this case, in this camera, okay, with this lens, if I'm shooting, let's see, outside, all right, at f11, I'm outside. The Sekonic light meter said shoot at f11 at 125th of a second. All right, and I'm focused. I'm taking a picture of my dog. In this case, today's generation, today, 2021. All right, it would be Dax and Dexter. Right, taking a picture of them. I know if I can get them to sit, and I'm taking the picture of them, and I focus, and I look on here. It says, all right, they're 20 feet away. There's a scale. There's a scale right there, right on the f-stop ring. Okay, right there. And those little lines will tell you that at f11, 20 feet away, this is how much of the scene will be in focus. Everything from approximately 17 feet, right, a few feet in front of the dogs, to 22 feet, 2 feet behind the dogs, will be in focus. So if you're like, geez, I want to get a little bit more in focus. I want to get not only the dogs, but their 2 bowls of water. I also want to get them in focus. So then you try f16, and you look at your scale, and the scale tells you, okay, everything from 13 feet to 27 feet will be in focus just by using a smaller f-stop, a smaller aperture. Gives you more. If this is your subject, all right, let me see. Get a nice subject here. This pen, okay. Now the camera is this way. This is your subject. If you use a smaller opening, right, more in front of it will be in focus, and more behind it will be in focus. If you use a wide open f-stop, in this case f3.5, very little in front of your subject, very little behind your subject will be in focus. When you learn that, you just did, Carmine just told you, that the wider the opening, the wider the aperture, meaning the smaller, the lower, the f-stop number, 3.5 is a smaller number than 16, right? When you use a smaller number, meaning a wider aperture, you get less front and rear of your subject in focus, which will blur it out, and it'll really make your subject stand out. If you use a higher number f-stop, like 22, it makes almost everything in focus, behind it and everything in front of it in focus, okay, depending on the lens, okay? But that's a general rule. Once you get that in your head, what the difference is between f3.5 and f22, you have just gone light years ahead into photography. Well, that's a long session. We're 45 minutes already. All right, but it's a very important subject, because without exposure knowledge, you would just be stuck in a world of keeping your camera set on fully automatic. And when you buy a fully mechanical camera, there's no such thing. You have to set the shutter speed and the f-stop. And that's why these cameras, once again, this is an Olympus OM1 with a beautiful Olympus 135mm lens. They sell them together on eBay, mint condition. Look at the condition of this thing. It looks like a piece of jewelry. Okay? Look at it. It's beautiful. They go for $100. That's why they go for $100. Because people have been using this fully automatic cell phone cameras. They look, they press the button, they got a picture. Okay? That's the majority of what people are taking photographs with. But you want to be a photographer. If you want to be a photographer, you have to learn what the cell phone knows. The cell phone knows what aperture and shutter speed to use. It knows. It knows. But you got to know, because you're in control. Remember I said that over and over? This is where your control is, right here. Do you want the whole picture to be in focus? Or how about just your subject? How about a picture of your girlfriend or your boyfriend, your partner, your wife, your husband, your kid? Beautiful photograph of your dog. His face in the background is all blurry. And him, her, their face is beautifully sharp. You can count their eyelashes. That's why a fully mechanical camera, or a camera that has all the controls, f-stop adjustable, shutter speed adjustable, right? This is what you want. And your shutter speed, same thing like your f-stop. It controls a different facet of the photograph. Do you want to keep the lens open longer, like we said, to get the trails of brake lights and headlights and make those beautiful lines as they go over a bridge? And do you want to use a slower shutter speed and move the camera when a baseball player is running the bases? They're running, click. They're in focus, frozen, and the background has those beautiful streaks of the trees whizzing by. Okay, so I didn't really even cover what I wanted to cover. Maybe 2 more minutes, because I got my cue card set up. What's the difference between a film speed, ISO 100 film, and 400 film? Here's the differences. With a 100 speed film, what do you gain? You gain finer grain. Grain are those little tiny dots in your photograph that look like pepper, right? 100 speed film will be very fine, almost unnoticeable. But that's what you gain. You gain very fine grain. Beautiful, smooth, dreamy, creamy photographs. But what you give up is the speed. You'd have to use lower shutter speeds. 400 speed film, you get more pronounced grain, right? Those little pepper flakes. They'll be noticeable, which I think are beautiful in a way, because it really that's a photograph, right? Like you're looking at an old-time photograph. The grain, but that's what you give up. You get more grain. What you gain is you can use faster shutter speeds for sporting events, right? Or if you're an older person and your hands aren't that steady, and you know from experience, you better use 250th of a second for everything, even taking a landscape photo or a picture of something static, like a beautiful old car. You better use 250th of a second because your hands aren't that steady anymore. So 100 speed film, you gain finer, creamy, dreamy photographs, less grain, great for portraits, but you have to use a slower shutter speed. Okay? Maybe even on a tripod would be best if you're not in bright sunlight. If you're in bright sunlight, it's never a problem. 400 speed film, you can use faster shutter speeds, but you give up smooth, creamy, dreamy photographs. You get a little bit of grain. But it depends on what you're doing. You're going out, you're taking action pictures, low light conditions, you're going to a concert, you're going to take pictures in a bar, in a pub, your friends are there, right? Or at a party in a basement, right? Lighting. It's not bright light, it's lighting, but it's not bright. 400 speed film. That's what you got to use. The pictures will come out beautiful. It's too long now. It's almost an hour. Next volume, we'll talk about aperture priority versus shutter priority. Okay? Guys, I think that's enough. 51 minutes. All right. I just want to say thanks for watching. For you old timers out there that know photography in and out, if you picked up one thing, fantastic. For you new guys that are just getting into photography, thinking about photography, just enjoying to watch a video, I want to wish you a good night. Have a great morning. Have a great afternoon. And if you can't sleep in the middle of the night, watch this video. I might put you to sleep.